Okay, I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Glendale City Council for April 8th, 2014 at 3:22 p.m. We have a roll call for the City Council.
Council members: Friedman, Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Sinanian.
Here.
Mayor Weaver.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the April 8th, 2014 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, April 3rd, 2014 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you are two items. First one is public hearing, Director of Community Development regarding proposed mixed-use project to be located at 125 North Central Avenue and 318 West Wilson Avenue. A is an ordinance for introduction, B is a motion approving stage 2 design, C is a motion approving a use variance, and D is a motion approving a conditional use permit.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. As mentioned, we have several actions that we are recommending to you related to what amounts to one of the final projects that you'll see coming through, large mixed-use projects coming through in this round of investment. The Mulaski group of companies is proposing a project for the southwest corner of Central and Wilson on an 1.5 acre site, and it will be mixed use in that vein, although with a slight wrinkle in that it will be a mid-sized format of retailer that will be part of the approvals before you here today. With the details on the staff report, we'll bring up Rather Duong, and he will be assisted by Alan Loomis to talk about the scope and the design of the project.
I will now open the public hearing.
Good afternoon, Mayor Weaver and members of the City Council. The project before you is a proposal by PH Glendale LLC, who is requesting approval of a Stage 2 design review, a use variance for a drive-through within the DSP zone, and a conditional use permit to allow the off-site sale of alcoholic beverages. The proposed project will also require an alley vacation, which will be considered by you tonight, and also to enter the project into development agreement for a 3-year term. The development agreement is intended to address the sustainable design incentive for the LEED Silver building and an early payment option for the development fees. Stage 1 design review was approved by the City Council last year on September 17th with conditions and comments. And on March 19th of this year, the Planning Commission recommended that the City Council approve both the alley vacation and the development agreement. The 59,492 square foot site is located at the southwest corner of Central and Wilson Avenues and is currently occupied by 2 one-story commercial buildings. The project will include 164 residential apartment units, which will be comprised of studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms, as well as 15,100 square feet of ground floor retail space. The building will be designed in the podium style. The 6-story building is 87 feet 5 inches high. The project will provide a total of 293 parking spaces, 51 of which will be located on grade, which will serve the commercial tenant, and 242 spaces will be located in a 2-level subterranean parking garage. Access to all parking facilities will be from Wilson Avenue. Staff has reviewed the proposal, and the project meets all other zoning requirements beside the use variance. And also the required findings for the CUP and the variance can be made in support of both applications. Staff recommends approval of the Stage 2 design, subject to the recommended conditions by the principal urban designer, as well as approval of the CUP and the variance with conditions. Mr. Alan Loomis, the principal urban designer, will discuss the evolution of the design and the recommended condition, and will be followed by the applicant and the project team to provide you with a more detailed presentation of the project. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer them.
Seeing none right now. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Alan Loomis, principal urban designer. Artie, can you pull up the slides? I want to acknowledge that the Stage 1 design was adopted with approximately 10 conditions that resulted in some pretty significant changes to the project, and the applicant has been very diligent in working with us to try and resolve the concerns that were raised at Stage 1. That being said, as we move to Stage 2, we have 3 recommended conditions and 3 considerations. And I think in order to explain them, I prepared a few slides because the argument is largely visual. So the first condition regards the stone veneer on the west building, which is called out as a Coronado or Tuscan stone. The west building is largely a Spanish Revival building, and when we look at Spanish Revival buildings, and a few examples here, we rarely see a kind of rusticated Tuscan or Italian stone on these buildings, particularly where we're engaged with arches. And that building, the west building, as it faces Wilson, has arched openings. More commonly, as you can see here, and probably the best and most immediate example is our own YMCA, where we have an arched opening fronting out onto Louise Street, and we see this kind of large stones with a keystone, which is the appropriate structural way that arched openings have been made since the Roman times. This is an example in Santa Barbara, a sort of base stone veneer we see in this case. This is an apartment building in Washington, D.C. This is one of the Y facilities in Pasadena with the same kind of arched opening, and we can see the same kind of large stone blocks sort of forming the arched openings on the GTs, on the old Grand Central Air Terminal. So our recommendation is that stone veneer be replaced with something that is stylistically appropriate to the Spanish Revival building as we see here. Our second condition relates to the windows. The building is large. Both buildings are largely designed in a neo-traditional style. And again, going back to either the Spanish style or other styles, we could see very subtle little windowsills called out or shown on almost all the windows, and the windows tend to be recessed. So that's both a condition and a consideration we're making. The drawings would seem to indicate that's the architect's intent, but that's not been clear, so we'd like to sort of clarify that they intend to have windowsills of some kind on the final project. The final condition relates to the large format signs. They have two large format signs that at this point on the drawings read 125 North Central. We anticipate that the building will eventually have a name like the Regis or the State or something along those lines. And these could be very exciting signs, especially at night. But as we can see in these historic examples, these kind of large format signs have 3-dimension during the day. They're not just a flat panel, even if they're very large. These cases, 2-3-story signs, but they're sort of the letters have dimension to them, so there's character to these signs during the day. Again, we think this is the architect's intent, but in the absence of having details on the signs, we'd like to make that a requirement. Finally, moving on to our considerations or recommendations, these are what we would call sort of friendly recommendations. It's at the discretion of the council to impose them or the architect, the applicant to sort of engage them. Again, coming to the west building, the west building is rendered in sort of brown and white, and this is, again, the Spanish Colonial Revival building. If we look at Spanish Colonial Revival buildings, even very large ones like the Santa Barbara Courthouse, the YMCA, or many of the buildings in Pasadena, they're almost always all white. They're rarely a mix of colors, especially not dark colors, maybe a mix of tans and whites, but they're generally lighter in tone, except in Latin America, and we were close enough to Latin America to consider that tradition. And in Latin America, oftentimes the colors are very vibrant and bold. There's almost neon in flavor, or kind of tangerines and teal colors. So they could be very exciting. So we'd like to suggest perhaps the color palette should be changed. And then finally, again on the west building, the Spanish Revival style building, there are a number of kind of unique flourishes to Spanish Revival buildings that we think could be easily and inexpensively incorporated into the building. So for example, if we look at this building, which is a fairly recent building in Santa Barbara, we see that we've got a little chimney cap, and as the wall comes down, it flares out ever so slightly. This tower element, slightly flared, not straight up and down. And when we get to the roof, we have these chimneys that pop up, and we can see on a roof deck that allows for sort of amenities at the roof deck. So these tiny little flourishes could potentially enliven the facade and make it a little more authentically a Spanish Colonial Revival building. And we'd be happy to work with the applicant to sort of figure out strategic and precise locations where they could incorporate those kinds of ideas. And with that, we've concluded our presentation, Rather and I, we'd be happy to answer any questions from staff, but otherwise we turn it over to the applicant's team.
Of the last group, you said there were 10 conditions?
At stage one, we had 10 conditions in
And
consideration.
have they all been met, or are these 3 that are still left?
For the most part, they have all been met.
So these are all new ones now?
These are new ones, yes.
Mr. Najarian?
Can we go back a couple slides? Yeah, right there. What location in Latin America is that? that
The
Cuba?
top one is Coral Gables, Miami area. This is the Biltmore Hotel.
That's the United States.
That is Latin America.
This one is, I believe this one is at the bottom one is in Cuba, I believe. Cuba or Puerto Rico.
So your recommendation is that they use those colors?
As an alternative to all white, alternatively, this is a recommendation. They could simply keep the building as proposed. This is in Southern California, the Spanish colonial buildings tend to be largely all white and tan.
Any other questions? Shall we go to the applicant, development team? Okay, how much time do you need?
I've been told we'll need 15 minutes, but my portion will be very brief.
That's good. Let that be a standard.
Honorable Mayor Weaver, council members, Najarian, Sinanian, Quintero, and I don't know if Friedman was on the phone. I was reading somewhere where she might be. Welcome if you are. My name is Gary Fry. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Mulaski Group of Companies based out of Las Vegas. We're looking forward to building our project here in Glendale. With me today are some members of our team I will introduce. Richard Worthington, our Chief Operating Officer, Rodney Kahn, our Entitlement Consultant, Alvin Galstian, our Real Estate Attorney, Sung Kim, Design Architect from Humphreys and Partners. We have Representative Claire Yeager of Linscott Law and Greenspan, our Traffic Engineers. Also in attendance are representatives from CVS, Ken Morris, Stephen Lobb, and Christian Charbonnet, and they will be able to answer any questions you might have about the operations or our tenant CVS. I'd like to thank City Manager Ochoa, Fasanagani, Mark Garrity, Raladong, and Alan Loomis. I think we've had the most design meetings of anyone else submitting a project to the city, and they were very open and available to us to have our meetings, and I appreciate it very much. We listened closely to their recommendations. I think we made the changes that this board and staff had asked for, and we believe we have a very good project. I'd like to turn it over to Rodney Kahn, and if we have any questions, I'll be able to answer them afterwards for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, and City staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located here in the city of Glendale. Our project, you'll see in the yellow here, is located, as pointed out, on the corner of Central and Wilson Avenues. It's in the core of our downtown area. We're in walking distance to the Glendale Galleria, to the Americana brand, and a number of shops and restaurants in the area. For my part of the presentation, what I'd like to do is point out a number of important improvements and components of our project. As staff mentioned, we are proposing a CVS pharmacy and retail store on the corner of Central and Wilson Avenue. The residents living in our project and the residents in the surrounding area, along with the hotel that's across the street, will very much appreciate and welcome this CVS into the area. As you can see, the CVS has separate parking, 51 spaces, that are on the ground level. It also offers a drive-through. This drive-through is an excellent amenity for prescription pickup and drop-off for the elderly, for parents with sick children, when the weather is bad or it's dark, to be able to remain in their cars, to drop off their prescriptions and pick them back up. We will also have 164 residential dwelling units, units for singles, for couples, and for families. The parking proposed is 293 spaces, which is actually 13 more spaces than what the code requires. Our parking incorporates commercial, residential, guest parking. We also have shared car parking, along with electric car charger facilities, and of course, along with short-term and long-term bicycle parking as well. We are also on a transportation corridor, Central Avenue, and we have both the MTA and the Glendale B line has stops and hubs that are in close proximity to our site. Part of our request is to vacate an existing alley. It's a substandard alley. It's 16 feet in width. And what we're proposing to do is beneath that alley, we'll extend our subterranean parking level. Above that alley, we'll extend our amenity deck. But what we'll also do is we will improve the alley. We'll widen it by 4 feet, so it will now be a standard 20-foot alley, and then we'll open it up again for public use. As mentioned by staff, our building is designed to meet silver LEED requirements. That is our downtown incentive. The U.S. Green Building Council certifies this rating, and after the construction of the project, will give a certificate that acknowledges that these two buildings will meet the silver LEED requirement. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it over to our architect, Song Kim, to address the design considerations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, city staff. My name is Sung Kim, project architect from Humphreys and Partners. Humphreys and Partners is a national multifamily architectural firm with multiple regional offices, and I represent our office in the Newport Beach. Since acquiring comments and feedback from the Stage 1 hearing, we have continued to work with the owner and the staff in refining, improving, and sometimes changing the design. I believe the design we are presenting today is the very result of the teamwork and collaboration, and it continues to be inclusive, then exclusive, universal, then eclectic, and more residential than commercial. We have made a series of refinement on the eastern building, which is comprised of 5 levels of residential over a retail, which is a CVS pharmacy. All uses of the building materials have been identified and upgraded. We have limestone veneer at the corner tower, precast window surround, precast cornice treatment. Excuse me. The proportion of the Central Avenue facade has been refined to respect the commercial atmosphere where the massing is simple yet grandeur. This portion of the project resonates the Glendale iconic building at Americana. The true challenge since the first hearing was retooling the design of the western building. Not only it needed to be read similar to the eastern building to render the project as one, yet we had to differentiate it in respect to the downtown specific plan transitional zone design concept. Kind of like different but the same. In collaboration with the city staff, we incorporated traditional influences of Spanish Mission and Tuscan architectural style. With the incorporation of the pitch roof, scalable facade treatments, and the use of stacked stone veneer, additional building setback were incorporated to create pedestrian-friendly experience along Wilson Avenue. With those incorporation, we believe we have designed a unique building that is different from the eastern building. In addition, with the use of the same window proportions, similar cornice and window treatments, and the use of colors, the western building also complements and respects the eastern building, rendering the project as one. Besides the exterior design improvements we made, I'd like to focus on the open space and the amenities that we're providing on the project. We by far exceed the required open space in the square footage. The open space are comprised of the ground level courtyards, podium-level deck, which brings the residents from the west and the east together. And we have roof terrace on the northeast corner of the building.
Excuse me, could I ask a question?
Yes.
The podium open space, about how many square feet is that?
The podium deck is about, about 10,000, no, it's not 10,000. 10,680 feet,
So
about
about-
10,000.
About the size of 4 2,500 square foot homes. Good size.
Yes, and this was an improvement we made, which we expanded between the two buildings, where it truly brings the whole building together at this level. So we have multiple courtyards on the ground level. This is the podium deck in the middle. We also have a secondary deck on the west side, where the buildings are set back about 30 feet in respect to the adjacent residential zone. And we have amenities such as barbecues, sunbathing area, shaded lounge areas, TV and bar on the roof terrace where residents can mingle and socialize. We also have some internal amenities such as great room, two-story gym, and yoga room, which will actively interact with the outdoor deck. And on the upper level, we have a theater and a business center, which will also serve additional spaces for the residents. We have considered all conditions and comments that the staff has asked us during this stage 2 design review process. We have continued to work closely with our clients. I believe what we have presented today, the refinement and improvement on the exterior design, alongside the well-designed amenities, will serve and enliven the lifestyle of Glendale residents. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any architecturally related questions.
Mr. Quintero.
What have you done in terms of opportunities for plug-in electric cars, bicycles, et cetera?
Is we have 2 levels of parking garage for residents, and there will be designated areas where we would have the charging stations installed.
And how about bicycle?
Yes, we also have designated areas in the parking garage level for residents in a secured area.
Okay, seeing no more questions.
Thank you.
One more member of the team? That's it?
Unless you have questions.
No? Okay, let's go to the other public. Let's see if 2 minutes will cover what you want to say. Richard Worthington?
He's just here in case there's any questions.
You're not related to Worthington Ford, eh?
No.
Okay. Good. Next speaker, Sam Manukian.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Manukian. I'm the director of the commercial division for RE/MAX. I wanted to basically take this opportunity to thank you guys, thank the staff, and most importantly, thank the Mulaski Group for not giving up on us and coming through and giving us a product like this, especially with the servicing of the CVS coming in. I think it's a component that fits with the remaining aspect of the development that we have lined up for Central, and I'm just extremely excited for coming through. I hope you support this project.
Thank you. Next speaker, Aram Kazazian.
Yeah, my name is Aram Kazazian. I have no problem with the project, but what I'm going to say, I know you're not going to listen. You never listen here. But the problem over here is, number one is parking. If this was not in the DSP zone, which part of it is not, you would need another 100 additional parking spaces. The back section of it is not in the DSP zone, so you need a variance. That's one thing, unless you change the zoning now. Now, the other problem you have, You have Wilson Avenue has very heavy traffic. I know, I'm there all the time. This area needs a right turn lane, straight lane, and a left turn lane. You're not allowing for that. You're not allowing for any future expansion. So you're going to bottleneck yourself in for life. That's one other thing. Your accumulative impact on the parking is not being studied. There's never been a cumulative impact in this area on parking. You don't know what's going on. All the buildings come up on the market. You're going to be nightmare. So that's a problem you're going to have. So you should consider all that, and maybe you should rethink it again. Now, regarding landscaping, there is no landscaping of this building on the exterior of it. There's only 10 pots, flower pots, on Wilson Avenue to the last 50 feet of it, which is you have a 5-foot setback. The building is only 5-foot setback in from the sidewalk, and the trees are only in the sidewalk, and you put trees on the sidewalk, you narrow the sidewalks down. The sidewalks are not sufficient anyway. Sidewalks are not to be used for landscape purposes. The building should be set back so you could at least put some kind of a improvement. Landscaping is very important. Thank you very much, but just remember, you are short in parking. And if you figure the parking, you have 10 guest parking for 164 units, which is not enough. If you were there somewhere else, you're going to need 20. Thank you.
The applicant like to, this last of the cards, the applicant like to respond to some of the comments?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor and City Council. In terms of the clarification of what I just heard, the entire project is located in the downtown specific plan. There is no piece of this that is outside of it. It is entirely within the DSP area. So that gentleman is confused. The second thing, as it relates to parking, we exceed the parking requirements. I mentioned that as part of my presentation. We're not meeting the minimum, we're actually exceeding them. And as was pointed out earlier, that's along with other parking as well. Our guest parking spaces exceeds what the code requires.
How many are there? I'm sorry. How many guest parking spaces are there?
16 or 17, I think.
Well, the code requires that 10, so there'd be 17, but we have 13 additional parking spaces on top of that. So we have a total, we could have, if we allocated it, 30 spaces, which far exceeds what the code requires just for the guest parking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to conclude our remarks. If there's other questions as it relates to traffic, we have our experts and our engineers here as well, or anything else related to the project. We hope that you see to approve this.
Has
Thank you
the
very
parking
much.
been studied, the traffic parking been studied and approved by the city?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, city staff. My name is Claire Look-Yeager. I'm a principal with the firm of Lynn Scott Law and Greenspan Engineers, and our firm prepared the traffic impact study and the code parking analysis associated with the project. The city's Traffic and Transportation Division staff scoped out the traffic analysis prior to commencement. We reviewed existing and future operations at 7 intersections, 2 street segments. We also included in the analysis traffic from 37 other development projects which are currently being proposed. Based on the findings of our traffic analysis, there were no significant impacts. Levels of service at all 7 intersections were level of service C or better, which is very good operating conditions.
Thank you very much.
And I'll also, just as a point of clarification, there was no shared parking analysis prepared for the project. And if the shared parking analysis were provided and the residential parking were assumed not to be solely for the use of residents, there'd be a much lower demand than code.
Thank you. Okay, I have no more cards. We've heard from the party. We'll close the public hearing. It's my colleague's turn. Mr.
I do have a question. I just want to make sure that the applicant has an opportunity to address the recommendations specifically as made by the planning department.
So we have reviewed three new conditions that the staff has posed, and also the 3 recommendations. The main one being the stacked stone that we have rendered on the western building. Correct that our building now has a Spanish Mission Tuscan influence. This material is very widely used in residential buildings, and we've actually studied a version where Alan had asked us to look at. We did it as architect, didn't like it, owner didn't like it. This use of stone is actually in line with the Tuscan style. It's not Spanish Mission, but our building has influences both style. And if I may, I'll go to the elevation that shows it's this area here. So the use of different materials on the ground level, I believe that this provides a transition from more commercially oriented Central Avenue as you roll into more residential related along Wilson Avenue. Therefore, this new material will provide that transitional experience from commercial and residential. And second one is the color. I'm sorry, Mr.
You want to ask?
I was going
Mr. Quintero?
to ask you about the color. So.
Yeah.
And the color, I think it's pretty simple. Those vibrant colors are not well fitting into the design that we have. There again, we needed to render the project as one. Now that the massing and the forms are quite different, we needed to use the language of proportions and the colors to render the project as one. Now these colors are slightly different, but they're similar in its tone. Therefore, the project is rendered as one. So I disagree of using those vibrant colors mentioned in staff's recommendation.
Could I ask on the color,
Yes.
the rendering and what we see in our handouts, it's not as white as showing, so I don't know which is the true color, so to speak. The renderings we have or what's on there?
We actually have prepared a material board. We did specify the actual manufacturer and then the color code of each paint we're proposing. Now, it just shows a little differently on the screen when it's printed out, but we could prepare that for you, for your review if need be. And the last one is these architectural elements such as chimneys, finials, flare walls. We also looked at it initially. We didn't share with the staff, we shared it with the owner. But this traditional architectural style at this scale is somewhat difficult to execute. These details mentioned by staff are more appropriate in a smaller 2-story, maybe 3-story structure where the details become more delicate. And that is my stand, that is the owner's stand, and that is the reason why we didn't particularly execute those three recommendations.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so ultimately, are you going to, on the west-facing building, ultimately, are you going to go with the darker color, or are you going to go with a lighter white, kind of tan, cream?
We would like to go with this darker color, which connects to the darker color used on the western building. We do have white facades, per se, wrapping around the corner and the west side to break up the massing of the building. This is the facade that faces the lower density.
Right. And how about the idea of the windows and some of the suggestions they had there?
The intent is to recess the windows where possible, yes. And I agree that that is a main characteristic of this style of architecture, so the windows will be recessed.
Any more questions?
Again, to add on that, one of the items was the sign. We agreed to do that, and that was our intention to start with, but without a name and a final approval, we haven't gone to the full design of the sign yet, but we do accept their recommendation for that.
Okay. Like I said, the public hearing is closed. So if there's questions from my colleagues at all, or
I have some
recommendation? Mr. Najarian.
So looking at page 3 of the report, says that the Stage 1 design was approved by the council on September 17th with numerous conditions and comments for redesign. The architect has redesigned the project and satisfactorily addressed a majority of the conditions. What are the conditions that were not addressed?
Mr. Loomis.
Alan Loomis, Principal Urban Designer again. The conditions from the September hearing that have not been addressed would include the first one, which the condition was to redesign the west building so that effectively turn it around 180 degrees. At the time, the council reviewed that condition and expressed an opinion and preference for the project as presented. So to a large extent, that condition has not been met, because to do it meant changing the project around, contrary to the council's desire at that hearing. In terms of conditions, those are largely that's the condition. Now, in terms of consideration, one of the considerations was to actually reduce the size of that second floor podium deck that connects the two buildings. In fact, the deck has actually expanded in size to cover more of the alley. However, one of the comments that we made was to thicken the edge of the deck. In Stage 1, it was basically a 4-inch thick concrete slab where it bridges over the alley. And as you can see on this rendering, this edge now actually reads as if it was a real bridge. So that was one of the comments that we had made that they've addressed. Another comment that we had made that we don't think has been adequately addressed or has changed has to do with the pathway between the parking lot getting into the CVS entry. They're really, at this point, in order to, if there's a pedestrian pathway, it basically exits out here, walks up the alleyway, and then crosses over. There isn't exactly a kind of direct sort of vestibule to vestibule from between the parking garage and that entrance off the alley to the CVS. So this is largely the same plan that we saw at Stage 1. But again, our recommendation on this was a consideration for them to explore. And then finally, and the reason we're having a discussion about the architectural characteristics and style of the building is that we had requested that we be provided with inspirational images so we know what style the architect is intending to pursue, and thus far we haven't seen that. So we're having this debate, is it a Tuscan style, is it a Spanish style? We're having to interpret from the drawings as they've been presented. That's why we're at this stage with these final package of conditions.
Those are the only ones that were not fully
yes, that we can come to some, yes. All the other conditions, we came to some agreement that what they had proposed, we thought met the intent of the conditions.
Okay. One of the components of this is requesting a height variance from the standards of the DSP, and that a bonus would be permitted with a LEEDs certification. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how do we hold them?
Just for the record, it's an incentive, not a variance, correct?
It's an incentive, not a variance. It's an incentive that if you provide that, then you will automatically get the additional height and density. That is an incentive in the downtown specific plan.
I guess let me be clear with what I mean on that, is that without performing some extra act or providing some extra amenity, they otherwise would not be able to achieve that extra height.
Correct.
So the extra benefit that they're providing is the LEEDs certification. So how do we, the building will be built by the time it's certified. How do we know?
The applicant is posting a bond. We actually did a calculation of the value of that additional amenity and the square footage and the height, and based on that they're posting a bond, and after they get their LEED certification we will release the bond.
So what is the value of that extra height?
I think Ms. Van might work.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, what we asked the developers to do is to have the value of that, it's the delta in the value between the building as they could build by right and what would be allowed with the incentive imposed. And so that was approximately $1.3 million will be the bond that will be posted and held until we have the certification from the U.S. Green Building Council to assure just what you're concerned about, is that the project is not built, oh well, we didn't install certain incentives that are required to get that certification, and to avoid that greenwashing possibility.
My next question is, currently there is on-street metered parking on Central. Is that going to disappear?
This proposal does not change anything on the street unless, if anything changes on the street, that would be designed by the city engineer for other purposes, not for this project.
Okay. And with regard to Wilson, don't we have a policy that whenever a lot, a property is being redeveloped, that if possible, we widen our streets at least a few feet to accommodate traffic flow?
I know we don't have that policy in the downtown specific plan, and actually from a planning standpoint, at some point in the past, a past city engineer had the policy that every time there was a project, he would ask for a dedication to widen. In fact, we recommended against that once Mr. Galanian became the new city engineer. We expressed our concern from the planning division at the time that we don't think that's actually the best policy for residential streets in particular, and that the dedication needs to be following a different type of a plan, a capital improvement plan or something else that the city engineer has done. And since then, I know Mr. Galanian was here earlier. I know that they have followed that, and we are in sync with them. So if there is a capital improvement project that requires long-term widening of streets, they'll go for it. Otherwise, what we were getting was these bubbles in the middle of the streets that are actually not pedestrian friendly, and they would lose some of the character of the older, narrower residential streets. We were actually not necessarily in favor of that at the time. And in this case, this was not a requirement.
One of the items before us is approving a CUP, and that's for off-site alcohol sales.
Sales of alcohol for our off-site consumption.
Off-site consumption. Now, the Glendale Police Department has advised that 2 sales locations for off-site consumption is sufficient for this particular census tract. We currently have 3, and CVS would be the 4th. Does the sale of off-site liquor, having 4 locations, which flies directly in opposition to what the police department has recommended, cause the planning department any concern?
Again, I'm not speaking for the police department. For the planning department, it doesn't. And here's the reason why. This is the downtown specific planning area and all these areas where the residential uses and the commercial uses come together at the street level, where we want to provide the convenience of shopping for people if they want to go down and buy a number of things that they need, from whether it's from people in this building or the surrounding buildings or people from up the street from the residential area. The idea is that they can walk to one store and buy what they need, including alcoholic beverages. The police department data really focuses on the number of crimes associated with alcohol, etc., where they may or may not take into account the urban form and the types of development that we're encouraging here. Here we're encouraging mixed-use downtown-style development. So it's not unusual for several different venues that sell the same things to be in different stores along the same street, and it just provides a certain level of convenience for people who go to the stores to shop. That's all.
No, I can appreciate the planning staff is concerned about convenience. But I can assure you the police department is concerned about crime and the safety of the residents. Is there someone from the police department here that can address this? No. Well, let me tell my colleagues that having a 4th off-site sale of alcohol when the police department recommends 2 concerns me. And I, in these issues of public safety and crime, defer to the police department. So I don't think that a CUP is appropriate to permit alcohol sales, which would be the 4th location in the census tract. And I don't know why, other than just a passing paragraph, passing sentence or two, it isn't addressed more fully. So I do have a problem with that. Maybe you guys don't. I do. I'm concerned about safety. When the police department makes a recommendation, I take that seriously.
Mr. Najarian, may I ask a question? What are the other 3 sites?
We should ask our planning department. I don't know what they are. I'm reading their report. On page 8 of the report, mid-paragraph, where it says there are currently 3 off-sale
I don't know from the
licenses.
off of my head where we gave the alcohol.
Nobody came
The
prepared for that
CUP,
one.
it could be a restaurant, it could be other stores nearby that they also. Let me also stress, this is, CVS is a drugstore. You go to buy drugs, you also buy a six-pack of beer. That's really all it is. This is not a bar. And with all due respect to our police department, I've had this conversation with some older police staff that just selling alcohol in itself does not lead into crimes associated with alcohol consumption. And I would stand by that right here. We hardly see drugstores in downtown Glendale where alcohol is sold be the reason why we have alcohol-related crime. Usually that's associated with drinking alcohol as opposed to selling or buying alcohol right on the spot.
Do you?
If I could just, and I appreciate your opinion, Mr. Hagani. You are a great planner. But rather than go through and ask you what courses you've had in crime prevention and crime analysis and relationship between alcohol and crime and sale and crime, I really have to defer to the police department. So, but I do appreciate your excellent work as a planner.
Mr. Khan, comment on that?
Yes, I do. Real brief comment. Councilman Najarian, before we filed this application, I spoke to Deputy Chief Povolitis, and I also spoke to Lieutenant Steve Bickle, both of the Glendale Police Department. And I told them what we were proposing. I told them exactly the way it would operate, and they had no problem with this application. If they did, you would have seen that in your report as well, because this was circulated to them as well. I just want to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I don't want to argue, but if they were going to give a clear bill of health, I think that would have been included in our report. So the fact that their comments are not in here, you're saying that if they had a problem, it would be in here. Well, the flip side is if they were okay with it, that would be in here too. And what we do see is a caution that this is the 4th site in a census tract where 2 are the limit that they suggest, the suggested limit. I mean, here it is. I'm not making this up. I'm not making hay. To me, this is a concern.
Mr. Ochoa, did you want to say something?
I would only submit to you that while I appreciate Mr. Najarian's concern to the extent, a couple things, that the police department does have standards. This is one of those standards, and those standards exist as guidelines for us to take into consideration. But as has been mentioned, Mr. Khan had made the point that I was going to make, that the police department does indeed see these reports. We do have weekly briefings on the agenda, knew this project was coming, and to the extent that this is a drugstore selling any number of things as drugstores have evolved over the years, as opposed to a liquor store, which generally is what that standard is intended to restrict. The proliferation of liquor stores, particularly liquor stores that are selling certain types of liquor, selling them in certain capacities and quantities, as opposed to a store that sells liquor versus a liquor store. That's generally what they are looking to preclude.
Well, generally, I'm looking for information when I have to make a decision on a CUP, not secondhand, not anecdotal. Where is the police department? This is, I think, a significant request. It's a CUP to sell alcohol in the downtown area. I think I'm confused as to why they're not here. Looks like we've got quite a room full of staff ready to address any particular nuance of parking or design or color or density or urban design, this was one of the issues before us.
And to the extent that alcohol was the driving influence behind this $40 million project, or $34 million project, my guess is that you would see the police department here. It's an ancillary convenient use. If it pleases the council, I'm sure I can get Chief Castro here, as well as, or Deputy Chief Povolitis, to give you their solemn assurances that they have no problem with granting the CUP for those reasons.
Sure, that's what I was going to ask. There's three of us yet haven't spoken. In the interim, I assume somebody can walk across the street from the police and reassure us?
Most assuredly, sir.
Mr.
I just have a quick question from the planning director. Do you remember how many liquor licenses are at the Americana currently?
18.
18, that's
Yes.
what I thought.
18.
Off-site?
On-site?
18 says...
On-site, off-site?
They're
Handed
preferable.
out.
They're for some on-site consumption, some for sale, for off-site use, yes.
Mr.
I have a
Sinani.
similar question of Mr. Hagani. Do we have other census areas where we've exceeded the limit?
Yes, we do. And let me just say this. I have been in this business for 28 years, and in every city I've worked with, that is a requirement. What you refer to is something that the ABC recommends, and the ABCs from time to time writes to planning departments, and that's why I'm familiar with that case, saying that you have exceeded the number that we recommend per census tract, and how come? So we always write, I have written letters back to the ABC saying that those numbers are a way to prevent alcohol-related crime, and in Glendale, we do not have these issues, and I send sometimes, from time to time, I send actually census tract information related to crime to say that the reason that you came up with these standards are understandable in other communities. In Glendale, we do not have those issues. And then they just kind of go away. And that's the last time I wrote a letter like that to the ABC was a number of years ago. And I haven't gotten a letter from them for a while.
Mr. Katera, do you want to make comments at all, or?
Are we ready? No more
Yeah.
questions?
I have no questions.
Okay, I'll make my comments. I'm very pleased that we're at this stage. I want to thank all the folks that have worked on this, including the staff. I know they've spent a lot of time working with the developers. I think this is a wonderful project that upgrades the area west of Central. All you have to do is drive down Central. To your left, you see the new buildings going up and a lot of kind of vibrant feel that you're in a different city, so to speak. On the right-hand side, unfortunately, it's not even close. It's definitely needs upgrading. This particular corner I'm very familiar with. I've been into that building so many times when it was the Social Security Administration, when the Armenian Society of LA moved in. Before that, there was a Filipino organization that rented space there, and of course we've always had the mattress companies that have kind of come in and out, and other furniture type of companies. So it's time for it to go. It's time to move on. Another positive about this location is the multiple bus lines that go up and down Central that crisscross Broadway. So it's a wonderful connection for people that either are transit dependent or choose not to drive. The CV pharmacy, I can't think of a better use. I was very excited when I found out that CV would be putting a store up there. It's going to work very well for that entire almost little mini region, let's call it. It's going to work very, very well. I'm expecting it to be one of their better performing stores, because when you look to the west, all of the neighborhoods to the west, literally from Pacific Avenue all the way to the freeway, this is going to be their pharmacy of choice. I'm sure of that. There'll be plenty of parking for it. And the pharmacy business, as we all know, you read business periodicals, Walgreens, Rite Aid, CV, they're all heading, CVS, they're all heading in a different direction, they actually have these super upscale, I don't know if this will be one of them, but they actually have these super upscale pharmacies now in Manhattan, and I don't know where else, maybe Palm Beach, that are really quite interesting what they're doing, they're even doing some prepared food, et cetera. So anyway, I think CV, it's a home run. I like the architectural style very much, and I like the idea of two building designs. I think that's pretty unique, so you don't have the feeling that it's one large monolithic look. In terms of the colors and so forth, I kind of side with the staff. I don't think a dark, bright color is a good idea, but I think maybe a little more white and a little more tan, a little more cream on the contrasting color, I think, is a better bet than a darker color. And let me put on my architectural critique hat. And fresh from almost a month in Spain, I feel very qualified to to make these comments. I don't know. To me, either you do Mission or you do Tuscan. I think it's kind of hard to sort of blend the two. They're far removed geographically and historically. So, but anyway, having said that, I do like the different building designs, and whatever the final decision is, whatever we arrive at, I think it's going to work quite well. And then I'm very happy that it's a Leeds building. I think that's what this builder does. They've done it all over the Southwest, and I'm happy they're doing that again. And of course, we also have, as all the other buildings, we have the electrical plug-ins, and we have plenty of bike storage and ability for people to keep bicycles and use them throughout Glendale. So all in all, I support the building, and hopefully we're going to approve it and have a wonderful design on that corner.
Mr. Sinania.
I share a lot of the sentiments expressed by Councilmember Quintero, so I'm not going to regurgitate a lot of the stuff that he said. Some of the points that I'll stress is, with respect to parking, one of the speakers said that we don't listen, or that's a big issue, that's a big problem. Listen, there's got to be certainty with respect to parking. So we have the DSP. The DSP sets the parking requirements. I wasn't here when DSP was adopted, but it was adopted for a reason. A lot of analysis went into it. We set a standard, and once we set a standard, there's certainty associated with that, so that when developers come in, they want to develop something, they know what it is that's going to be required of them. This developer has met the standard, has exceeded it, so I don't see how that's an issue right now. If we believe that somehow the standards that were set some time back have changed and we need to revisit that, that's a conversation for a different day. But right now, they've met it. I think that's fine. I do agree also that I like the lighter color pattern, just because I'm thinking, that style is more of a lighter style, and I think it'll fit better with Glendale. But I don't like the whole idea of the multicolored Miami Beach kind of looking building. Just not in a vacuum. I like it, but within context of Glendale, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, if we had a street that we designated as Little Havana or something like that, that'd be exciting. That'd be great. We would have, actually, it would be a focal point for a lot of tourism in California, but that's not the case now. And the only thing that I do like, and I'd like to make a part of this approval, would be the idea of these flares, the asymmetrical or the setback, the set-offs of the towers and stuff like that, just because I think it gives it depth and makes the buildings more interested. I may be a little, I may be impacted by some of the buildings that I've seen go up, not just recently, but also in the past, where things look just too flat. The facade is too flat. Now that's not the case with this project. Clearly, there's a lot of architectural elements that nullify that. But nevertheless, I think these setbacks make things much more interesting. So I'm in favor of this project.
Thank you. And before two of us speak, do we have a report from the police department at all? Mr. Najarian.
Mr. Weaver, I'm going to waive, to the extent my opinion counts, I'm going to waive my comments and waive what I would foresee extensive questioning of the Assistant Chief and just call the question after your comments.
Okay. Well, for me, I'm just an engineer. I'm not an architect. And when I got this set of drawings, it's one of the nicest set I've seen. Some of the architectural styles that have been used in the city recently said, well, it's not my cup of tea. I grew up liking Spanish. This is the land of the Verdugos. So I like tile roofs, Spanish arches, etc., like my house that I designed. But I like everything about this. The color texture, I don't know, you want to change the color a little. I don't want to see a white tower next to a dark brown. It's got to work together. I like the 3 recommendations been made. Don't need them at all. I like what I see. You can tell me what kind of style it is, and I could have guessed all day long, and I'd never figure out what style it is. If I see something and I like it, that's it. And I like it. I'm not trying to fit Tuscany or ancient Rome or any other style in. It's nice looking. Maybe that's because I don't nitpick it or something. I like the step back up on the west side, the steps up away, giving a lot of privacy to the private homes to the west. I like the additional widening of the podium area for recreation, whatever. Means the people also that are crossing from the parking structure to CVS will be able to walk in the dry when it's raining because it covers enough of the area. I like the roof deck some of the units will have up there with a great view to the northwest. And I'm sure that when it's done, there'll be plenty of landscaping or sufficient landscaping around. Streets, yeah, I drive Wilson all the time. I drive by the mattress store. Wilson, I move at a pretty good clip there. I don't see needing more lanes there. Traffic and engineering have approved it. Let's see, is there anything else I have to say? No, I just plain old like it. So I'd like you to go ahead and build it. CVS will, as Mr. Quintero said, serve a big population in that area. To the west, all the single-family residential. To the south, down to Brand. East, we're building a new hotel. People that are staying there may need CVS pharmacy. So I think it's a good deal. So that concludes my comments. There are 4 motions.
I guess I start by introducing the ordinance.
For the development agreement.
That's correct.
It's been done.
Okay, and then I need a motion to approve the Stage 2 design, right?
Correct.
Okay, I'll make that motion, but I do want to incorporate something that Mr. Sinanian said, and that's the idea of working with the staff to try to get a little more, get some different design elements going in there. If it's not chimneys, then it's something else. But,
Can the condition
yeah.
read that they will work with staff into the best means possible, reach an agreement with staff?
Yeah, I think that needs to be done. And if mission has to be dropped and it turns out to be Tuscany, fine, or if we go in another direction, fine. But
You just work with the staff, and if it doesn't work out, you don't have to come back to us.
That would be fine, thank you.
okay. All right, so I'll make that motion at 1B.
For a second? Okay, roll call.
Council members Friedman, Najarian.
No.
Quintero.
Yes.
Sinanian.
Yes.
Mayor Weaver.
Aye.
All right.
C.
Then I'll make the motion at 1C to approve the use variance.
For a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Council members Friedman, Najarian.
Yes.
Quintero.
Yes.
Sinanian.
Yes.
Mayor Weaver.
Aye. And now the conditional use
Now,
permit.
1D, the conditional use permit.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call?
Councilmembers Friedman, Najarian,
No.
Quintero,
Yes.
Sinanian,
Yes.
Mayor Weaver.
Aye. Okay, go build it. Get the permits. Get the permits first.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Okay, what is next, please?
Next item is a public hearing as well, Director of Economic Development regarding statutory development agreement in accordance with GMC Chapter 30.26.100 for the advertising, signage, overlay zone, non-accessory sign and sign structures, and animated signs and sign structure. 2A is an ordinance for introduction.
So, Mr. Ochoa, this is Americana and the Galleria where we told you to go back and develop a comprehensive overall sign. Excuse me?
Public hearing, just whenever.
Yeah, well, I'm going to. Comprehensive plan wherein the city can end up recognizing a little revenue off these signs, only for the Americana and the Galleria, correct?
Well, in the geographic area that is described in the
geographical, yeah.
ordinance. Last summer, council acted and created the advertising signage overlay zone, the AZOS, as we refer to it, understanding that it would provide a unique opportunity for advertisement and marketing, and that if such opportunities were executed by those folks within that area vis-a-vis a development agreement activated by an ordinance such as you have today, then yes, at some point the city could realize a benefit sharing, a gain sharing in terms of revenue realized from the advertisement on a graduated basis based on the amortization of the different types of signs. So what you have today is such an development agreements pursued by Glendale 1 and 2, which are effectively GGP, our corporate partners at the Glendale Galleria. And Phil Lanzafan will give you any amount of detail that I might have left out. Phil?
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, indeed, last summer you adopted the ordinance to create this district. Last summer's action required that before you put up a sign, you have a development agreement with the City of Glendale. That is what this item is before you today. You've already created the zone and the standards for it. This implements General Gross and the Galleria's desire to put signage up. The agreement does outline the obligations of the parties and pertains only to the sign. It's not like a typical development agreement where you might have other things like freezing fees or something like that. It really is particular to the sign. The term is for 20 years. The revenues are accounted for and shared annually. The city's share is, during an amortization period, 12% of gross revenues. After that amortization period, it goes to 15%. Those amortization periods are different for static signs, just regular signs that we see. That is 5 years. If it is a digital sign, that is amortized over a 10-year period. The development agreement requires the signage to meet all the city codes and regulations, and it specifically calls out illumination in the code section of our Glendale Municipal Code where that is found. Generally speaking, it can't be any brighter than the ambient light in the area. That is regulated by the Director of Community Development. The Planning Commission found that the development agreement is consistent with the general plan, and they have recommended your approval. Staff that worked on the agreement is here, as well as legal counsel if you have any questions.
Thank you. If there's no questions, I'll open the public hearing. I have a couple cards. Okay, thank you, Phil. Arm Kazazian. Arm Kazazian. Arm Kazazian. In 2 minutes.
This is oral communication, right?
No. On the second item, item number 2.
Oh, this is the standards.
No, not the second. I marked the wrong one. I crossed it out.
Oral communications? There's no oral communications on this.
There's no oral communication?
No.
Okay, because I want to talk about something that happened last week.
Now, that doesn't have any
Oh, how do
Where
I
it is.
bring that up to the development agency? It was inaccurate
There is no
information.
redevelopment agency.
He can come speak to the council during tonight's meeting if he wants, Mr. Mayor.
Because I think a motion you guys made, I believe is invalid, that's why.
Well, you have to come back at oral communication.
It's under,
tonight.
or it was under the development.
You'll have to come to oral communication tonight.
Okay.
You're
In
welcome.
fact, Ara brought it up and it was incorrect. That's
Thank
why.
you. The next speaker, Johnny Harrison.
I was corrected, it was incorrect.
Come back.
Hello, I'm Johnny Harrison, President of the Brand Boulevard of Cars, and Vice President, General Manager, Lexus at Glendale. We've been watching this sign process come into play over the last year or so, and we applaud it. All the dealerships in turn applaud it. With actually, city being able to generate funds from it is actually is a bonus to signage. Except for there's one thing that we've run across in there, as we've stated before, is a really concern of not only for the Brand Boulevard of Cars, but also for the businesses as well as associations in the city of Glendale, which is basically that this entity can actually advertise and collect dollars from outside the city limits. So exactly our competition could be able to advertise right here in our hometown with no restrictions at all coming into play. The city would still reap the benefits of the revenue sharing, but in turn it could affect the businesses in the city of Glendale, not only for the Brand Boulevard of Cars, but across the board. And we really would like for you to, I know there's not a lot that you can legally do with that other than request from them that they pursue the businesses in Glendale, because we need the advertising dollars here, and we also need the tax revenue generated here as well as the revenue from the signs. So, thank you.
Thank you. I have no more cards. Mr.
Okay, I
Quintero.
think that's a very legitimate point. In addition to the revenue and sales tax, we also have the jobs that are associated with the Brand Boulevard of Cars. So if we could somehow, I know freedom of speech precludes us from, especially economic freedom of speech, which is trending lately, precludes us from, kind of setting any kind of guidelines, I guess. But what can we do? I'm curious because I think that is a legitimate concern.
You have an idea, Mr. Ochoa? Nothing?
I only play an attorney on TV. Right. I defer to Mike.
Oh, you defer to Mr. Garcia.
I think as Councilmember Quintero was alluding, we would have significant concerns from a legal standpoint, both from a content restriction, whether that would be lawful. There's certainly an argument to be made. We already restricted somewhat. We previously used to restrict it to the area within the ASOs itself. But again, it's a more limiting content-based restriction. We'd have significant concerns over it. The other thing that concerns us a little bit is there is some case laws restricting the ability of the city to impose a zoning regime that would have the effect of being a restraint on trade. Obviously, we had a purpose. The purpose would be to promote Glendale businesses. It's a legitimate purpose, but at the same time, can't be in such a way that it's actually restricting trade within the jurisdiction. There's some other constitutional provisions. So those are our concerns with such provision. I think, just from hearing Mr. Harrison's comments, I think he seemed to understand that we would have those restrictions, and I think from what I heard, maybe somewhat of a commitment from GGP at least to make the effort to not have such advertising, but that would have to be a question that's posed to the applicant. And from our perspective, from a zoning perspective, we'd have, again, significant concerns trying to impose that as a regulatory regime here in Glendale.
Yeah, and look, I mean, my feeling is, obviously, we'd love to have Lexus of Glendale doing advertising there, and Pacific BMW and all the rest of the dealerships. I sort of think it should be offered to them first, so to speak, rather than to go out and do another dealership from out of the city. Anyway, I do have a question. At the end of the 10 years, what happens then? Do we then renegotiate with?
Goes to 15%.
The term is for 20 years, the agreement. And yes, then you would renegotiate. If we were unable to come to some kind of resolution or negotiation, and this was still in place, I suppose they'd have to take the sign down, because then they would be out of compliance with the code.
Okay. I'll close the public hearing. There's an ordinance for introduction.
If there's no comments, I'll introduce the ordinance.
You? With that, is a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Stand adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Okay, I'd like to call to order the Glendale City Council for